Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to the weekly Armchair Sports Talk podcast. This is United show. This is Devil's Advocate. And today we have a very good transfer special here today. I'm joined by a very special guest, Mr. Ben Jacobs from CBS. We're here today to talk all things Manchester United. We're going to talk about incomings, outgoings, and also some potential takeover talk as well. So do smash like the video, do subscribe, and as always, we do appreciate your support. Ben, first of all, welcome to the show. Hope you're well. We were just discussing off air that this year, I suppose this time of year can be probably busier than others. How has the last, I suppose, 4 weeks post Premier League season been for you? Has it been just a whirlwind considering the Man United takeover and the usual transfer stories that are happening?
It's busy, and I think the first week or so of the window felt more like deadline day week than the opening to a window. Some of it's expected because clubs like to get their business done early. So naturally, if they've pre-planned that business, it is going to be announced or finalised in the early days. But a lot of agents, clubs, players that I speak to think that we're still getting that knock-on effect or surge from the World Cup. So if you usually had a World Cup in the summer, then it leads traditionally to a busy window. Whereas because it was a Winter World Cup, I think the January window was never going to be instantaneously busy because it's mid-season, and other than Chelsea, a lot of clubs don't really want to move to that degree and volume. And suddenly we're seeing now a summer where we've got a World Cup year knock-on, and the fact that you've got a lot of need and desire from a few clubs in particular. Manchester United are obviously one of them. And then I think the other factor is just this new Saudi move to try and sign multiple players for big money fees has added to the drama. So it's been busy and definitely haven't had too much sleep over the last few weeks. Then there's the Manchester United takeover on top as well. But as I always say, certainly can't complain because it's a job that I feel privileged to do and I enjoy every minute, even if I don't get too much sleep.
Yeah, especially I'd say these last few weeks, like especially with the Saudi league now, obviously it's after coming on the scene now, and you have the takeover, and then there's all these other deals. I'd say it's been crazy, as you said. You mentioned obviously Manchester United, Ben. Obviously the elephant in the room will be the takeover is kind of looming. In the last couple of weeks, there's been different stories coming out, whether Jim Ratcliffe's in the lead, Sheikh Jassim is in the lead. And then there's also been other reports that even the partial investment deal is still on the table. At this moment in time, obviously in the last week or so, it's been kind of quieter than it has been than recent weeks. Where are we now in terms of the Manchester United takeover? And like, are we going to hear of a preferred bidder, like I suppose, very soon, or do you think this could maybe drag on to maybe July?
I think that there's still this fixation over preferred bidder, and of course it might be helpful to call it that because it clarifies who's leading. But as I've said many times, I think we're beyond preferred bidder, even if it is called that for ease or in the media. We're at the point now effectively of winner. And you would normally in a traditional takeover, from my experience of covering them, have a variety of stages. Now, not every takeover is like this one and takes the form of a public auction, but you would normally have a variety of stages. One is a preferred bidder who would be the leading group, and they would enter into a exclusive period of negotiations, try and finalize the deal. But nothing would necessarily be guaranteed at that point, because in the period of exclusivity, they would do the due diligence and then try and sign something to move forwards. Then you would have, after you've signed, and effectively you have, in inverted commas, won, and then you've still got the completion process, which would be the third stage. So preferred bidder into winner or done deal, whatever you want to call it, into the completion process. And that would be normal for any takeover. What's atypical about the Manchester United process is that the Glazers have not shown their hand. They've not, at the time we're recording this, put anybody in an exclusive period. And what that means is that for the two leading groups looking for either an outright sale or control, they are acting like they're both preferred bidders and they're both 6 feet from the finishing line, and they are taking steps and holding talks and consulting with lawyers to get everything in order, ready in case they get a green light. So you could almost say that there's two preferred bidders at this stage, plus the minority investors who have got a lower confidence. And then there's always the unlikely scenario of a no sale as well, but we can't categorically discount it. And the Glazers haven't intimated to either group, at the time we're recording this anyway, that either of them have won. They're only telling both to get everything ready in case they've won. And what that may well mean is that we sort of skip a preferred bidder stage to any great degree, and we go straight to the point of effectively winner, followed by the completion process. So people are looking for news, and it's up to really Manchester United in conjunction with a group, if a group is chosen, when that news comes. It can come at the stage where you say, we're about to sign, or we've picked a group. It can come at the stage where you've signed, or it can come at the stage where you've actually completed the process. If they choose to do it at the earliest point, you could argue it will be in a matter of days or weeks. If they choose to do it when it's actually legally binding, and that would be at the point of winner, then there's a few other things that are necessary. For example, board approval, and also there would be some negotiation over break clauses, because once you decide that you've picked a group, then if either party back out, there is likely to be a hefty punishment or break clause. So that would also have to be determined and negotiated, which means that things can be moving behind the scenes without any public announcement. And obviously, if they wait in terms of an announcement until it's actually done, which I think is unlikely, but were they to wait until actually the funds are transferred, then you're looking at optimistically 6 weeks and pessimistically 12 weeks. So everyone kind of just wants to know who's won effectively. And I understand the fan frustration, but that frustration is also over the course of the last few weeks been echoed by the groups as well, who are very tense at this point because they feel that they've done everything in their power to win the race. And yet the Glazers haven't actually indicated to one group categorically that they are the winner. And I think this is why we're hearing so many stories, so many games. And I suppose the last thing I would say is just that a takeover, from my experience of covering them, is always a bit of a game. And you're always going to have a group that perhaps is leading and then another one that makes a counter. We saw that with the 9-2 Foundation, where that group made 2 bids after the April the 28th deadline. But the oddity of this particular deal is just that the actual propositions on the table are quite different. You've got a simple cash transaction that is for 100% of the club and is debt-free, and on paper looks like a fantastic deal for the future of the football club if we're only considering what's best for Manchester United from a football and brand perspective. So if that bid hits the right valuation and the Glazers are genuinely determined sellers, which has always been my understanding, then Qatar stand a very good chance. So the key question all along has been, have they hit the valuation? In other words, is the improved 5th bid going to be good enough? From the Ratcliffe perspective, even though Rain Group running the sale will try and pit them against each other and create competitive tension, it's more flexible. It's kind of dealer's choice. It's about whether or not the Glazers want an opportunity where maybe Joel and Avram can stay and leave in a laddered sense at a later date for a higher number. But also with Ratcliffe, he's quite prepared to take the 69% too. So again, it comes down to valuation. And when people say the Glazers might want to stay in a minority sense without their Class B power, we should also understand that that is still financially motivated. It's not out of sentiment because they desperately want to stay at the football club. It's out of a belief that the football club will be worth more in the years to come. So this is all about money. It's all been about games. And unfortunately, as much as I would like to tell you either one group or the other has won, at the time we're recording this, neither group have been categorically told that they've won. So we've definitely seen a shift after the 5th bid placed by Qatar, but the Ratcliffe group are also still in what they describe as positive and ongoing talks as well. And I think both feel genuinely they're 6 feet from the finishing line, but both fear that the other group is 6 inches from the finishing line. And it's now up to the Glazers to show their hand.
Do you know what this whole process just really reminds me of? Like last season, well, 2 seasons ago in F1 when Hamilton and Verstappen were right at the end, and it literally came down to the last lap of the race, and then Verstappen won it right at the end. It literally just reminds me of that, and where it's going right down to the wire, and you don't know what's going to happen. And yeah, it's a mad situation. I hope it gets resolved as soon as possible, because I think probably from a fan perspective, we want to see Eric Ten Hag to have I suppose the clarity and what the budget is, what the plans are going to be going forward, because look, I think he done well in the first season, considering all its different situations he had to face early on. So I'd like to see us get done so he can have clarity of kind of what the plans will be going forward. Ben, obviously there's been talks of incomings in the last couple of weeks, especially Mason Mount. You reported today the Manchester United are going to go in with another improved bid of £55 million. Are the club confident that this bid, maybe they want to get it over the line? And if Chelsea reject this, will Manchester United potentially walk away? Considering, like, at this moment in time, as we're speaking, we're kind of operating on a limited budget at the moment.
Yeah, I think the limited budget aspect is not as doom and gloom as is being painted. Manchester United are moving in the market, and if they have, for example, this Mount bid accepted, then they will purchase Mason Mount, whether the takeover is done or not. So I wouldn't quite paint it as Manchester United can't move until the takeover situation is resolved. But going forwards, the exact budget will be somewhat altered, especially if Sheikh Jassim comes in and clears the debt and maybe a little bit more ambitious in the market. But Manchester United are still ultimately bound by financial fair play. So nobody can come in and just spend 300 million or so, but everyone wants to know where they stand. And the other thing, of course, is that both groups will be looking at football experts or recruitment leads, and they might want to try, if they possibly can, and get them in as early as possible in order to still stand a chance of at least impacting some of this window. But with Mount, I think that Manchester United want the situation resolved quickly. Mount has already told Chelsea he wants the move, and Manchester United may well see the third bid, which is imminent. It might already be out there by the time people listen to this. Manchester United see that as pretty much their final offer, but there might be some verbal finessing and back and forth. And it's heading towards a deal at somewhere in the region of 55 to 60 million. So the key question is, will Chelsea accept that, or do they believe still that they can get more, or another suitor may come in? There's no indication that Arsenal will come. There's no indication that Liverpool will return, even though they had looked at Mason Mount in the build-up to the window opening. So Manchester United at the moment are in a one-horse race, and there is flexibility on all sides to try and get this one done, because everybody is now aware that Mason Mount wants the move. And this is why Manchester United are optimistic. So I think that it all comes down to this discipline of Manchester United, which is not about haggling only over Mount. It's, as I've said many times, about realizing they've got somewhere in the region of £100 million early window budget under the Glazers, regardless of what happens with any new ownership. And with that 100, they would ideally like two players. So Mount at 50, 55, 60 may allow them to move for another primary target at 30, 40, 50 million pounds and still be around the 100 million mark. But Mount at 70 might cost them another player. So this is why Manchester United are being very strict and disciplined and trying to get the lowest possible number. One, because that's just normal negotiation. You never come in with some sky high offer. But two, because it isn't only about Mount. The budget has to be looked at collaboratively with other targets to make sure that if it is Mount, it's Mount plus somebody else within the budget that they're looking to spend.
Yeah, look, I'm glad that, to an effect, that we aren't going in, all guns blazing straight away, and we've gone with the high offer, because we've seen in previous transfer windows before that we've overspent, and it's hindered other deals before. So I'm happy that that we're not kind of going in with ridiculous fees, especially the fact, like, he has 1 year left in his contract as well, and he wants to move. It's good that we're not overspending in that regard. You mentioned, obviously, we're operating within kind of 100 million budget, and we're kind of looking to target other players. Obviously, David De Gea's contract at the moment isn't signed yet, isn't fully agreed and announced. So as of right now, his contract is going to expire next week. The reports are suggesting at the moment that we are interested in Andrea Onana. His agent came to Manchester to have talks, and with Manchester United. Is that potentially the second player we're looking at? Let's say when this has gone out, that that Mount may be done. Is it a case we're maybe looking at Onana as well, as part of that kind of two-player kind of target in there?
We know the goalkeeper situation needs resolving, so there's a strong possibility that Manchester United move on that front and as quickly as they can. And I've said many times that regardless of De Gea Manchester United are looking for a number one goalkeeper, which means that there has to be that long-term succession plan as far as the club are concerned, because they know that De Gea is not going to be around forever, and he might not even be around after this summer. There's a lower confidence that he'll stay now compared to perhaps a few weeks or months ago. And as a consequence, Manchester United have to plan. So this isn't about wait for De Gea and then decide if you need a number one or a number two goalkeeper. This is about providing someone that can challenge David De Gea if he stays, and maybe climb above David De Gea if he stays. And De Gea may have to have that realization that he's a number two, or he's a squad goalkeeper that will play a variety of games but have to fight for his place, may lose his place, may not even start as the number one goalkeeper. So Manchester United are not going to move away from a number one target just because De Gea signs, because they're well aware that he's not going to be around at the football club forever. And the whole point of the extension offered to De Gea was around him being older, around reducing the wage. And that's the beginning of a succession plan. And the player has to ultimately buy into that. So we know goalkeeper is very important to Manchester United. And it's been clear for some time that Dean Henderson only wanted to return to Manchester United if he was kind of crowned the number one. And that doesn't appear to be the case, because he felt like there were sort of false promises from previous conversations before he left for his loan spell. And as a result, there's still an element of acrimony, because I think Henderson felt that he would have that opportunity and never got it. So that's not been forgotten. And now Manchester United are looking at certain number one options in the market, which again probably tells you that Henderson wouldn't be happy even if there was any possibility of a Manchester United future. So I think the first thing to say on the dynamic is look at Newcastle United last summer with Dubravka, who of course ended up having that short loan spell at Manchester United. Dubravka was Newcastle's number one goalkeeper. Nick Pope came in. And even though in hindsight, it seems ridiculous to say which one would have been the number one at the beginning of the season, Newcastle fans were arguing exactly that. Who's going to start in goal on the first game of the season? Is it Pope or is it Dubravka? And I think that this will be the case with Manchester United potentially as well. They can bring in a goalkeeper, and if De Gea stays, people will be wondering. If that goalkeeper is Onana, the first thing he's going to say is, am I categorically your number one? Because if you say to Andre Onana, you're fighting for a number one in the short term against David De Gea, he won't take the move. So that's another clue, because if the goalkeeper is of high profile and was to agree to join, then regardless of if De Gea stays or goes, you know that he's fallen down that pecking order. With De Gea, I think there is lower confidence that he'll extend at this point, but it's a fluid situation. And there are some offers on the table from clubs in Saudi Arabia as well. And no doubt he'll have other opportunities too. So we'll be able to make a very informed decision. And you can understand why De Gea also may be asking Manchester United what their plans are too. And if they can't give him a guarantee that he'll start the season in goal, that may inform his own decision as well. With Onana specifically, it's quite a difficult deal. So the Manchester United interest is very real. And price, as Chelsea found when they made a exploratory inquiry, is a problem. So you'll hear figures quoted somewhere in the region of 45 or 50 million euros. Manchester United's valuation is a fair bit lower than that, probably by 10 or 15 million euros. And I think that's too low for a player of his quality. But then what complicates it is not just can Manchester United get to 45 or 50 million euros. What complicates it is Inter see Onana as far higher than that. And they're doing this with a lot of their targets, with Barella, with Lautaro Martinez, with Milan Skriniar, who's going to PSG on a free, but last summer they were asking for 70, 75 million euros. So Inter need to sell. That's the good news, which means regardless of their bullish stance and regardless of their not for sale with some players or their high prices with some players, someone's got to go. And this again is why Skriniar has been significant, because last summer, had he gone to PSG, then they'd have got another 65, 70 million euros in the bank. And as a consequence, might have been able to hang on to one or two more stars. But they rejected the PSG offer. Then they rejected a lower PSG offer in January. So Nasser Al-Khalifi just said, I'll come back in the summer and I'll take the player on a free. And now Inter are in some financial hot water. So there's an opportunity for Onana for sure. Manchester United want to get Mount done. And then I do think they'll turn their attention to the goalkeeper. But negotiations with Inter won't be easy, because I do think that the valuation that's being put out there and hinted at by various sources is not a valuation that Inter accept. So sources in Italy are stressing the number is a fair bit higher. And then sources in Manchester are saying their starting point would be even lower than some of the figures quoted, which means that we actually might have quite a big gulf in valuation. So talks have taken place on the player side, and now we have to wait and see how things progress in terms of anything club to club over the coming weeks. But I do think we can call Onana a concrete Manchester United target.
Yeah, definitely. And look, from the couple of games I've watched from Ajax and Inter, especially the Champions League final, he's really impressed me. And look, if you're talking about players who've worked Eric Ten Hag, he'd be a player who Ten Hag trusts, obviously from having him at Ajax previously. Obviously, Inter have been interested in United players before. Is there any potentially United maybe adding players maybe to the deal to maybe sweeten it up, or is Inter's financial situation probably not going to allow that?
I think Inter predominantly want cash, and that's because they want to move in the market, and there's a strong possibility that they try and sign Romelu Lukaku again. I think that player swaps very rarely happen is a really important point to make. So how many headlines do you see a day about a player swap? We're seeing this with the vague Manchester United links with Declan Rice. They've not formally entered the race. It's normal to inquire about the deal on the player side, but they've not formally entered the race for Rice at the time of recording. But again, with that deal, it's players. We've also heard Harry Maguire leveraged as a player swap in a variety of deals. But how many times have players from Premier League clubs in particular actually been part of deals? Certainly not as often as you see in the headlines. So again, Harry Maguire, a player that people speak of being offloaded somewhere as part of a deal. And he'll have a conversation with Eric Ten Hag, and it may well be at the end of that conversation, there's a mutual acceptance that he is firmly available on the market. But I don't see Maguire going to Inter. Fred's probably another one that people mention many times about possibly being available on the market. I suppose you'd throw Donny van de Beek in there as well, even someone like Anthony Elanga. But it's speculative because people just take the name that is available on the market and they force them into a talk. And it might well be that that includes the club, but you've really got to strike the jackpot to find, when you want a target, a player who, one, wants to go, two, the club that you're offering them to wants to take them, three, it's affordable wage-wise, and four, the valuation is right to allow you to add that aspect to the deal. So it adds more time. I think somehow people think that it's win-win because you're getting an outgoing and an incoming in the same swoop. And it can happen, don't get me wrong. I'm sure people listening will have their own examples of it. But virtually every single day, we seem to hear that a player might be discussed. And I can't think of too many instances in windows where that actually comes off, because a lot has to come together in terms of the player desire. And players don't like it when they're leveraged as pawns. So if you've got an outgoing at Manchester United and they suddenly learn that they're being factored into a deal, then they may feel a bit devalued and may say, well, I've got other options. And I think this is why it doesn't happen as often as it gets touted in the media. So obviously, when you're Manchester United and you know the budget is tight, of course, if you are in a position where you can save and get an outgoing, you'd love it. But there's just so many opportunities and variables for roadblocks that may mean you start to explore that and then you realize they can't afford the player's wages. They don't want the player. The player's not interested in the move. The player's got a better option. And this is why it doesn't happen as often as people think. So yes, in answer to your question, there are Manchester United players that are clearly on the list of outgoings that, if Inter wanted, you could theoretically factor into the deal. And they may be discussed because that is a starting point. If you're Manchester United and you don't want to pay 60 million euros, 65 million euros, whatever the price is, of course you're going to say as a first opening question to a club like Inter, are there any of our players that you're interested in? But if you get a hard no, or if you get a no from the player, then you move on and you're back where you started, and you have to think of the deal once again as a cash transaction.
Yeah, look, 100%. I think it would be it's kind of a complex deal to get done anyway. Maybe obviously adding in a player could make that bit tougher. Final one for you, Ben, in terms of probably alongside goalkeeper is probably the most important position United have to fill this season is number 9. I know like recently there was talks United are kind of backing away from a potential deal for Harry Kane. There's been talks of Højlund as well. Is there any other number 9s out there that Manchester United are interested in, or are these kind of the main two that have been mentioned? Are they the only ones United are exploring?
Yeah, I think Højlund's a really interesting one because Erik ten Hag and Manchester United not only see the potential there, but they believe there would be a player desire to move. The problem with that one is price. The problem with all of these top number 9s is price, unfortunately. And that's just the nature of the fact you're either going for a young star with big value, or you're going for somebody totally established. And again, there's a massive fee. So everybody knows that if a deal became available for Harry Kane, Manchester United would see Kane as their top target in that particular position. But Daniel Levy is not going to make anybody's life easy negotiating for Kane, and Tottenham are calm about the situation. Even if he doesn't sign a new deal, they're quite happy to let the contract run down. So Kane would effectively have to force his way out of the football club, and Daniel Levy would still be looking for 100+ million. So Manchester United have got all kinds of complications. But what they did, as I reported a few months back now, is they went on the player side to find out, would he like the move, and is he prepared to help us ultimately facilitate the move by putting pressure on Daniel Levy and the Tottenham hierarchy. And it's difficult for Kane because obviously he's got such an affinity to Spurs. He doesn't want to leave on bad terms. And he's been there before to a smaller extent a couple of summers ago when the Manchester City move almost came off. And Levy turned around to Man City and said 200 million or go away. And Manchester City went away and have subsequently obviously got Erling Haaland, and it's ended quite well. So there's low confidence on the Manchester United side that Harry Kane will be possible. But with Højlund, I think it's the opposite. They believe that the player would actually quite like that move. And it then becomes about having to negotiate with Atalanta, who, as things stand, are intimating to anybody that is inquiring that they expect a massive fee. And that fee won't be in the region of 30 or 40 or 50 million, which is maybe what Manchester United felt when they first entered into the internal discussions they might be able to offer. I think we're looking at significantly more than that. And as a consequence, it will again come down to a negotiation and structure as well. And when you go for a young player like Rasmus Højlund, it's not necessarily only about the number. We're always fixated about number, but with this kind of deal, it's structure. It's about how much money you can give to Atalanta up front. It's about what are the terms you can give them so they get benefit from the deal in terms of add-ons, in terms of sell-ons, and anything else within the deal that allows them to feel like they've got some money up front and something in the long run. And this is why with a lot of young players, I doubt it will be the case in this scenario, but with a lot of young players under the age of 21, even 23, there's sometimes even the possibility to buy and loan straight back for another season. And that can be a big part of getting the deal over the line. So I think there's legs with Højlund for sure. I think with Osimhen, he would have joined Manchester United before he moved to Napoli. And that deal was actually progressing, but Osimhen just had a few doubts over how much game time he'd get. And I think that he made a smart choice by not going to Manchester United then, because he would have been quite far down the pecking order. He wanted to go to a club where he'd play regularly. And when you look at how he's excelled at Napoli, that was a good choice. But that love for Manchester United was there before the Napoli move, which means that if anyone hits the valuation out of all the Premier League clubs interested, I think Osimhen would really have his head turned by Manchester United, because now he knows that he'd get a place in that starting 11. Whereas a few years back, before the Napoli move, it wasn't the case. And I think at the time, Ighalo, who he knows, was at the football club, and Osimhen just looked at Ighalo and felt, well, even he's above me in the pecking order, so I have to look at his minutes and feel like I'm behind him. And as a consequence, I'm really not going to play that often. So the move never progressed. Now I think there would be a realistic chance of convincing the player to join, but it's about negotiating with Napoli. And what people forget with Napoli is that the package they allege, and I'll explain why I've said the word allege in a moment, but the package that they allege is 80 million euros that they paid Lille for Osimhen. So this is why they're saying 100 million euros would be an insult, because look what we paid for the player. And as a consequence, the fee is going to be somewhere close to double that 80 million euros, which is where the 150 million euros, in inverted commas, valuation comes from. And we wait and see whether Osimhen remains on the market and is sold for that astronomical offer. And I think Napoli would have to sell for the right price, and their president has said that, or whether eventually he's priced out the market, nobody makes that kind of offer, and then he ends up signing a new 2-year deal and tries to defend the Scudetto under the new manager, Rudy Garcia. But the 80 million, and this is the sort of complicating factor in terms of where clubs position themselves, the 80 million euros is a bit debatable. And those that follow Italian football will understand why, because it encompassed a guaranteed fee, a bunch of player swaps that had what some have alleged, although nothing has been proven or punished, but some have alleged are inflated valuations of players to get the deal to a higher number, and then bonuses as well. So the actual guaranteed cash component was a lot smaller than 80 million euros. So clubs doubling the bit they know Napoli definitely paid are taking a number more like 45 or 50 million euros and saying 100 million euros is double the guaranteed fee that you paid. Whereas Napoli is saying it was an 80 million euros package, double, or effectively don't even bother negotiating with us. So Manchester United aren't in a position to move on Osimhen at this point. But again, we know that he's a player that they really admire and would fit really well into the team. So it's a bit of a balancing act really at this stage for Manchester United, because every target they want has a complication. Højlund is young, and whether or not you can drop him straight in remains to be seen. And again, it's a big fee, but it is an investment rather than an expense because he's only 20 years of age. Harry Kane they'd love, but you've got to somehow get a deal with Daniel Levy, and you could get messed about all summer. Osimhen's got an astronomical price. And this is why I think the longer it drags on, if Manchester United have the budget eventually, and budget is another factor, of course, as well. But if they do find the budget, the longer the summer drags on, and if they don't find one of their many number 9 targets, keep an eye on Dusan Vlahovic, who is also on Manchester United's list, because it's difficult at the moment to move due to all the upheaval at Juventus and board change. But in a week or two or a month, I think Vlahovic could be available on the market. And still those looking at Vlahovic are quietly confident that maybe there's a slight cut price deal to be had and that the player is eyeing up a move to the Premier League. So I don't think there's anything imminent on that at this point, but just keep an eye on it, because if it drags on and Manchester United don't bring in a striker early, then I think we're going to hear more and more about Vlahovic and a possible move to the Premier League as the window goes on.
The number 9 one, I think, if you're talking to me about any position, I'd say that's the one that's going to drag on the most this summer, because look, there's very few, if you look at world football, there's very few top class number 9s out there that are available. So it is going to be a tough one. And look, hopefully, I'm praying by the first week of the Premier League season we have a striker, but I'm not banking on it right now. But Ben, I'm going to wrap it up there. Thanks very much for coming on this evening. It's been a great chat, and as always, really do appreciate your insight. And look, you're welcome back to the show at any stage. I'd say we will speak again very soon. But for everyone else, do smash and like the video, do subscribe, and as always, we'll see you later.